Welcome to Birth Words. This is episode number 47, and in today's episode, we'll be talking about silence.
Welcome to Birth Words. Words are powerful. What are you doing with yours? In this podcast, birth doula and applied linguistics scholar Sarah Pixton invites you to be intentional, reflective, and empowering with your language as we come together to honor those who give birth. The work of Birth Words is to elevate the language surrounding pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. Nothing in this podcast should be taken as medical advice.
So, as I said in the intro, we'll be talking about silence today. Before we get to silence, though, let's talk about the class that was released last week. Last Wednesday, I released the first online Birth Words class. It's taken through Teachable, so you go through different course modules, watching videos, doing activities, answering questions, pausing for reflection, and the topic of this course is complexities of communication. I know that many of you birth workers have been using virtual support largely, and a lot of that is very language-based. We talk and text, and sometimes things can get a little confusing. So this course walks you through a variety of the complexities that come along with communication and specifically how those things can look in the birth space. It doesn't give you answers. It doesn't tell you the right things to say, the right words to say. Instead, it encourages you to pause and reflect on your situations and your conversations and how you might best meet the needs of those that you converse with by understanding the complexities involved when we communicate through language. So it is only $30. It's an introductory course, and it's a little teaser for the full course that's coming later this year. There's in August going to be an online course release that's a full in-depth course that will take you more than 8 hours to complete. This introductory one is about an hour, maybe an hour and a half to complete. So it's going to give you a little taste for what's coming. Of course, if you're in Utah, there's also the in-person in-depth workshop coming up in September. And when you register for the Intro to Birth Words class that was just released, when you enroll in that class, I will send you an email with a code for $40 off of the in-depth course, whether you take it online or in person. So that's like saving $10 on the full course and giving you a sneak peek at the content months in advance when I know this is a time that it could be particularly relevant to the work that you're doing right now. So head over to birthwords.com/classes to check it out. And now let's talk about silence. Silence is an interesting topic when we think about birth and language and words and their power. There's also a power in and a space for silence. There are a few different ways to think about this concept of silence. So let's start by thinking about episode 44 was an interview with Adriana Losada, the host of the Birthful podcast. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, you might want to just pause this episode right now and go give a listen to that and come back here in about 20 minutes when you've listened to that episode. But Adriana brought up the fact that birth physiologically is not a cognitive process. She likes to say that we birth with our bodies, not with our brains or our minds. And that when we give birth, it's not really an activity that happens in our thinking brain in our neocortex, but it's much more of a primal, instinctual activity that can sometimes be inhibited by language, by even speaking or responding to spoken words. I like the guideline that Adriana gave to follow the birth giver's lead. if the birth giver is speaking and interacting verbally, then it's an indication that that's likely appropriate to reciprocate and also speak and respond. But if the birth giver draws inside and is not verbalizing, is not communicating via words, then it's a good opportunity to consider nonverbal forms of communication that can allow the birth giver to stay in that primal, non-thinking brain space, and still communicate whatever's needed in that context. So for instance, Adriana gave the example of breathing deeply. Rather than saying deep, slow breaths, using the nonverbal communication and just taking a deep breath, giving that example can be just as powerful, just as communicative, or even more so when the birth giver is in that space where language is inhibitive. So that's one way to think about silence. Again, if the birth giver is talking and chatting, then go ahead and respond to that sort of conversation and communicate in that way. There are other ways to think about silence in the birth space as well. And I think that there can be a really strong power in silence. And I quoted this quote from Dr. Sarah Buckley again in episode 44, but here again is a quote from Sarah Buckley's Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering. She says, "Avoid talking to the laboring woman unless absolutely necessary." Adriana and I discussed that that's where she's coming from with this comment, is that understanding of the thinking brain not being the one directing the process of birth, and respecting and honoring that and giving that space through silence. But another role that silence can play is by speaking beyond the power of language. So Ludwig Wittgenstein is a 20th century Austrian philosopher, and he said, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." I'll say that one more time. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. From this perspective, there are limits to our language. There are moments in our lives that are so powerful and beautiful and full of wonder that they're beyond the power of speech to capture and represent and communicate. And silence can play the role of signifying this is a moment or an experience beyond the power of speech. And I think that often in the birth space, silence can convey that message. It can say, wow, this is a sacred space. Speaking in this space wouldn't do justice to the beauty and the wonder of the moment. And silence holds space for that sort of an understanding of the majesty and wonder of birth. Here's a quote from Adam Patterson, who's commenting on Wittgenstein, the Austrian philosopher's concept of silence. He says, "Wittgenstein set out to discover what could be said and ultimately concluded that the irresolvable mysteries in life, most of which exist in the realm of speculation and the imagination, are beyond language. What doesn't exist we can't effectively articulate, and what we can't articulate we must pass over in silence. But don't worry, there's a little comfort. This silence isn't to be feared, but cherished. It's where many of life's most meaningful experiences reside." And I would argue that a birth experience that is honored with silence is one of those meaningful life experiences that Peterson is referring to with this analysis. Another commentary on Wittgenstein's silence philosophy comes from a Romanian writer named Ștefan Vlăduțescu. And he wrote, "The iconic semiotic significance and force of the unsaid is that the communicative act of not saying is most eloquent in not only that it is indeed said by this iconic silence, but also that this silence intensifies its existence." That was rich, so I'm going to read it one more time. Again, this is Ștefan Vlăduțescu. "The iconic semiotic significance and force of the unsaid is that the communicative act of not saying is most eloquent in not only that it is indeed said by this iconic silence, but also that this silence intensifies its existence." To me, what Vlăduțescu is saying here is that we talked about how language is a semiotic system. Oh, back in the early episodes. I don't have a number off the top of my head. Go back to episode 1 and listen through and find when we talked about language is a semiotic system, which means that signs are used to communicate meaning, and words are these signs that communicate meaning. Any word is really just a bundle of letters, symbols that we decided should make certain sounds, and even those sounds joined together is a symbolic representation of a concept that we're trying to communicate. And in this quote, Vlăduțescu is saying that just as words play that semiotic role of representing something, so too can silence step into that role. And the very act of not saying, as he says, the communicative act of not saying, choosing not to speak, is a semiotic act, a meaning-making act. It's showing that this, whatever we're not commenting on, whatever we're not engaging with in spoken word, is beyond the realm of speech. It exists beyond something that we can capture with mere words. And that is powerful. And Vlăduțescu also comments that the act of not saying is powerful by itself, but it also intensifies the experience by making that nonverbal commentary, if you will. By honoring that experience with silence, it intensifies the experience itself. Wow, really interesting. So those are some of my thoughts about silence, but I know that it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this. I'm going to post today. The episode comes out on Monday, May 18th. On that day, I'll be posting in the Facebook Birthwords community group a post about this topic of silence. And I want to hear your thoughts about what role does silence play in the birth space during pregnancy? Is it positive? Is it negative? What other perspectives haven't we yet considered about the role of silence in the birth experience and outside of the birth experience as well, throughout pregnancy and the postpartum period? What role can silence play? And I would love to hear what your thoughts and perspectives are. So if you're not yet a member of that group, Birthwords Community on Facebook, go to Facebook, search for Birthwords Community and request to join the group. And I'll try to approve your request as quickly as possible so you can join in the conversation about silence there. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas and engaging with you on that topic. And we're going to wrap up for today. Again, I would encourage you to go to birthwords.com/classes, check out the introductory course that has just recently been made available there. And I would love to hear from you in the Facebook group. Have a great week.
If you're interested in sharing your ideas or experiences on the podcast, go to birthwords.com If you're liking what you hear, please leave a review on your podcast app. For more resources about language for a better birth, subscribe to the monthly newsletter at birthwords.com and follow Birthwords on Instagram and Facebook.